Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I discuss ChatGPT. We talked to Matt Sekol about all things ESG. And finally, according to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the average person owns 86 Lego bricks. Lego can make 5 million bricks an hour, and it would take approximately 40 billion bricks to get to the moon. So there you go. In honor of Matt's, should we call it obsession? Yeah. Yeah. Obsession with Legos. There you go. Some fun Lego facts.
I have 0 Legos. I'm on the opposite end of that.
I definitely have Legos. I would say I'm over 86, but not a ton, but I definitely am over 86. So I don't know, Morgan, Sam, Legos? Sam's a no.
Single one.
Wow. Well, I'm pulling weight for everybody here. Okay.
I'd like to see the statistic. Is that 86 Lego bricks, boys versus girls?
Well, hopefully not. But yeah, I mean, we're not a great sample. Oh man. All right. Hit that music.
Okay, fantastic news. As we've mentioned before, EPR is doing an AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything, on Tuesday, April 11th, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on our YouTube channel, which you can find at EPR Podcast when you go to YouTube and search. And we will be available for you to ask us anything about career advice, our favorite pizza toppings, movies, anything else you might be able to think of. We also have a long list of past guests who are joining us, including Chris Whitehead, Jory Larson, Matt Sekol, Mike Mayer, Ron Deverman, Sam Bartleson, who's our volunteer, woo, Shannon Olgers, Wesley Knapp, Ethan Brown from the Sweaty Penguin, Hannah, possibly another volunteer, Juan Ravallo, Morgan, another awesome volunteer, Mehmet Sisomis, Eric Newgard, Sonny Fleming, Tom Abdallah, and Tom Reese.
There's so many fun people in that list. That's great.
I know. It's going to be great. I'm like,
oh, that's great.
Super excited.
Yeah.
But yeah, so join us. All you have to do is tune in on YouTube and you can type in your questions in the chat.
Awesome.
And now we are lacking a sponsor for this episode. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Are you ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is time for our 30-second sponsor challenge to Nic the Comedian. Ready, go.
Okay, everyone, we've all heard ChatGPT. It's the latest thing. It's great and wonderful. And I was wondering, Laura, would you like it to be less good? Because we have a solution. Okay, like maybe you don't want it to finish. Maybe you don't want it to make a ton of sense. Maybe you just want it to talk about how big your hands are. Introducing ChatCBD. It is a slightly different version of the exact same product, and I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. It's going to be amazing, revolutionize the world, or at least it would. But it forgot what it was doing when it started. Okay, so that's our sponsor for today, ChatCBD. Check it out, chatcbd.org.
I think that's a solid gold one right there.
They should make that.
Right.
Oh man, what were we talking about? Yeah. There's so many stars, man. All right,
let's get to our segment. We talked to Matt a little bit about all this AI stuff, and I know everyone is talking about it, but that doesn't mean we don't have to not talk about it. Have you been using the ChatGPT? So like the AI thing, IAIA thing, I am always saying ChatGPT instead of ChatGPT. I just can't get it right. So for me, it's just Chat AI. Because for some reason, the A becomes before the I, which is why I say it wrong for IAIA, I think. It's too many I's and A's.
There's too many. Yeah, there's too many options. I mean, like, I know that it exists, and so it's kind of one of those things. Like, it has a very narrow focus, even though it seems like it can answer any question. It still has like, there's a great John Oliver did a great segment on it, actually. So if you're really curious and you want to know like the background of what we're talking about, just go watch that segment where he talks about ChatGPT. There's probably some value to it. The problem I have typically when you're doing technical writing is that it's just so vastly different than writing literature or, doing book reports. I'm not saying that they couldn't do those things. I just would be really, really fearful of what would come back. But that doesn't mean that, there's a place for it. It doesn't mean that eventually maybe we'll get there where it'll be, I mean, like NEPA is like 50% written already. Every single NEPA project you've ever done is already 50% written. So in some ways, ChatGPT isn't going to help a whole lot because we already have the background information. We already know this is an Air Force installation that's done 7,500 environmental projects. So there's a description of the base, there's a description of the process that they go through for the environmental regulations, and each one of their resource areas has a description of where the project is, right? So that stuff's already written. Maybe where it could be beneficial is doing the environmental consequences, like what is the issue? But then that's really subjective and it's really nuanced. So I don't know if ChatGPT, like GPT, see now I'm doing it, would get us to where we wouldn't have to do anything other than spot check it, because I just, it's not there yet, and I just don't know that it would be. Not to say that it can't or that it won't, but
okay. Yeah. Well, you take it down the technical route. I just meant in general, like, have you popped in some comedy bits that you have and see if it can make it funnier for you or something?
Oh God. No, I would be horrified to do that because I'm sure it'll be better than what I do. And that would kill me. I'm like, oh, this is so much funnier than what I wrote. And so, yeah, there's a big part of me that would not want to do that at all. Like and I think that's kind of one of the big challenges we see with a lot of artists who are saying, like, this isn't art. It's not fair to do this kind of thing. And yeah, it just is what it is, I think.
Yeah, I find it really helpful when I'm just stuck on how to write something. So, and this, I think, for young people and people who are career seeking, and I think it has a lot of potential because that's not technical writing. But if I have to write an email to, like, I had a customer that I had to write like an email about, like, how do I tell this person that I don't think they're a good fit for me, but say it in a nice way. So I kind of just chatted with the chat AI and was like, so this is my situation. This is what I'd like to say. And it was like, cool. Yeah, that's great. But you could also say this, and it just like, it helps. It's very good at like, no, that's not ethical. Not that I'm like trying to do that, but sometimes I just ask it silly questions to see what it will say.
Yeah.
It will tell you like, no, this could be perceived this way or something. So somewhere in there built into it is some high morals.
Oh, well,
standard. So
probably
good to know so far.
But, well, I was going to say, so Sam just put in a joke. She just asked it to tell us a joke. So I don't know if we want to, we'll read it here. Why did the tomato turn red? Because it saw the salad dressing. So maybe I don't have to worry about the comedy part. I don't feel like maybe I have to worry about that. Maybe.
Do you know if you ask Siri to tell you a joke or a story, it will?
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't, but yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of funny.
Is it also as good as that? Because that's what.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think it's useful in certain ways, others not so much, but those things, it'll keep growing and changing from here.
Yeah. And I don't know, like plagiarism is the biggest challenge, I think, or the concern, where you're not actually doing the work anymore. You're just saying, write a book report on, what is it? Ulysses? What is it? Odyssey? You know what? Ignore that part. Just write a book report. And it's like, yeah, okay, here it is. And that's where it's really creepy, scary.
Yeah, I think if you were going to cheat on that, you're probably going to cheat anyway, because I know that Cliff Notes and all these other things exist, and there's still ways to have someone else write a book report for you. It still makes it easier. But like for beneficial, I've been like, oh my God, I want to read this book, but I don't have time. Can you give me a summary? Oh, it's amazing.
Really? Oh, that's funny. Oh, yeah.
Now, there's a bunch of blog writers out there who spend a lot of their time reading the book and creating the thing. So, but for me, like, I'm so over every time I have a question and I Google something, I have to read 17 articles with 4 paragraphs before they get to the point. So
I know. I don't even read the first few paragraphs. I literally skip the middle. Yeah.
Right? I don't read the first part of anybody's blogs because, it's just all blah, blah, blah.
It's like, give me the information I want. I know you're doing this on purpose so that I keep scrolling, but I hate that you're doing it.
Right. And that's really a thing that I think that chat AI is not doing and is what people want, So it's always easy to hate on new technology, and then it just will permeate our culture anyway.
Exactly. Might as well embrace it.
But I'm really loving just getting the answer I'm looking for instead of having to read a bunch of blog articles I'm not interested in.
Oh, well, that's great. Awesome. Yeah.
Like,
I'll have to mess around with it.
Your job, like, let's tie it back to our other conversation we had about not having the experience you're looking for on a resume. I would get on there and be like, hey, want to apply for this job. I have this past experience and I'm looking to see how I could get NEPA experience or whatever and see what it tells me,
Wow. Does it actually do that?
Yeah.
Is it that wild? Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right.
You do have to evaluate. There's a whole, you put in the questions that you have to give it lots of details. The more details you give it, the better. And then once you get the results, you still have to check it. It's not like you just go, oh, well, the thing told me. Remember when Google Maps came out and people were driving off of roads? You still have to verify that the information it gave you is correct so that ChatGPT doesn't drive you off a road, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. And now I'm curious.
And now you want to know.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, that's great. Let's
we'll go now so you can start asking some questions.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go. Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Matthew Sekol, who is the ESG and sustainability advocate at Microsoft, back on the show. It's his second time back, so it's safe to say he's now our ESG expert. I didn't ask him about that beforehand, but that's the case. So, Matt, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you both again. So happy to be here today.
So how have you been? What's been going on?
I've been doing well. The ESG expert thing is interesting, especially in modern times with all the controversies going on, but all the momentum as well around all the regulations that have been signed since we last spoke, as well as those that are coming into existence. So it's definitely an interesting time to be in this space.
Well, okay, kind of give us a little bit of that update. What has been signed? What has changed since last we spoke?
Sure. So, oh my gosh. So last time we spoke,
that's
CSRD,
our first and final question.
Yeah, I don't know when that was actually. It's been a while though, but CSRD was signed in the EU. So companies are starting to work towards getting their ESG metrics broadly, not just environmental, but social as well. Here in the US, the rumor is that the SEC will be announcing its ruling on its climate risk proposal in April. The expectations are it's either going to have mostly everything that it did, which was largely carbon disclosures plus line items for climate risk, or that two particular pieces may be removed. One would be climate risk on the balance sheet, and the other one would be scope 3 emissions, because that is just a hot mess.
Yeah.
So everybody's kind of trying to figure out where that's going. And the other one is the International Sustainability Standards Board has been working on its proposal for broadly sustainability accounting standards for everything. I say everything, it's not quite everything outside the US. All those other countries that use different accounting standards typically lock into IFRS, and then ISSB will set the sustainability accounting standards. So everything keeps moving forward.
Yeah, but not much. Just all that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too fun. Well, I guess we're definitely going to dive into all that, and I'm really excited to kind of. Is it weird that I'm like, oh yes, parts 1, 2, and 3. I'm very excited about all this kind of stuff. We say you're an expert too, but you're really a generalist, right? Because you have to know a little about a lot of different things, a lot of different countries. And I feel like we have this stigma with generalists where they're not as valuable as subject matter experts or not as significant as, specialists. So how do you as a generalist kind of fight back on that trend, and how do you see yourself?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. And actually, we talked about this just a little bit last time, because you folks have such amazing specialists on the show that really go deep into the topics that they cover. Mm-hmm. That is 100% not me. So I came into this space, I came into ESG and sustainability from the perspective of financial markets and looking at how they were looking at their investments. And of course, their investments range across all kinds of different industry, but also all kinds of different companies, from, specific projects that they might be funding with NGOs and nonprofits to startups that they're looking to help fund. So it was this really rich ecosystem. And I started kind of looking at it in the way that like chief investment officers or portfolio managers would. And I'm like, where can I find these intersections between these? And that was actually where things got really interesting. But it stems largely from my background in liberal arts, because with liberal arts, that topic is so broad. And what it teaches you to do, and it sounds so cliche, but what it teaches you to do is really critically think about disparate, disconnected topics in a single way. And what I found when I started trying to figure out ESG was I had the skills from my educational background to really apply it to this particular topic. So what ends up happening is I'll get asked questions, oh my gosh, all over the place. Like a healthcare provider was asking me about how could they leverage data and AI to inform their research about cellular changes that happen as carbon increases in the atmosphere. And I'm like, well, I can certainly talk about the data side. Obviously, I can't talk about the medical side. But that question was something I had never heard before, but it instantly made sense, right? Obviously, physiologically, we're going to have changes happening to our bodies. And medical researchers, especially in the areas like the communities in which they operate, they're going to want to know, what does that mean for their patients coming in? How is it going to impact them? And so what I try to do is, because again, obviously I'm not a medical researcher, for example, I try to apply the things I know to those challenges. And I know data and AI. So I talk to them about, well, how do you conduct your research? What kind of data are you gathering? What does happen to cells when carbon's in the atmosphere? What kind of insights do you think you would get? How could artificial intelligence play a role in helping you, figure that out a little bit? And then from there, we get a little bit deeper, but usually what ends up happening is, especially here at Microsoft, we have industry experts that I can pull in and say, all right, folks, listen, this is what they're trying to do. This is why it's important from a sustainability perspective. Can you help them figure out kind of some of this models that they're trying to build? So I definitely leverage like a broader ecosystem to go deep, but that generalist can really help spark new types of conversations.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned too, that like you say, different people with different backgrounds and you get to kind of bring everybody together. It's almost like a collaborative effort where it's like, you get people talking that otherwise wouldn't have, right? And yeah, you're creative enough to get to that. I love that. That's really, really cool. I know we're already kind of diving in a bit, but one of the things we also wanted to do is just remind people of the difference between sustainability and ESG. I think we said a little bit last time, but let's just do it again because I know it's going to come up.
This is personal for me because I get asked all the time as a career coach. People are like, I want a job in sustainability, or wait, do I want a job in ESG? And they're like, I don't know what to do. Where do I go? And I'm like, okay, first of all,
yeah,
same difference. So I don't know. So give me the rundown.
So it's complicated, but even since we spoke last, I think my perspective on this probably has shifted a little bit. So I'll start with that perspective. The perspective from last time. So there are table stakes license to operate things that every company needs to do now. And largely they focus on saving the planet or addressing marginalized groups. And that's sustainability, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are things everybody should just be doing. That's good business sense. Mm-hmm. It helps with talent retention, talent attraction, and also it helps save the planet and us.
Yeah.
ESG is not that. ESG is about managing the risks and opportunities that the world is presenting to the company. So, for example, if I'm a retailer with 1,000 stores in Florida, I need to understand where my highest risks are from a flooding perspective, from a wind perspective, and then manage those buildings in a way so that they don't blow away when a hurricane comes through. That's more what ESG is. Now, they can weave into each other, though, which is what I think my evolution in thinking about this topic has come to. Because if you think about what I said about the table stakes and license to operate, there are a lot of very talented people right now in the market looking to find purpose in their work. Coming out of COVID with this renewed sense of purpose, I want my work to save the world. And so as a result, if a company isn't focused on those table stakes issues, it can become a detractor for talent to enter that particular company. That is a material risk for the company, which means that a sustainability challenge can become an ESG risk. But I'll take it one step further too. The messaging also gets muddied with financial services firms because financial services firms have those two perspectives as well. They're trying to figure out, are companies that are saving the world actually more profitable? But then there are other financial services firms that are saying, I believe that if a company manages its ESG risks and opportunities better, that they will be around longer and therefore they'll have some sort of long-term value that I can gain out of that. The challenge is that financial services firms often call it all ESG.
ESG.
Yeah, when really like the sustainability is more focused on impact investing, socially responsible investing, and then ESG is ESG investing. But even when I go out to like financial services websites and I look to see how they built their products, it isn't very clear which one they're talking about, or they're labeling it one way and talking about it another way. And Laura, to your point, that's why everybody's so like, which one do I want to do? It starts with where the money comes from, and then it just permeates the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's helpful. I think I usually describe it to them like sustainability is like everything from recycling to just like how long can we keep using this product and blah, blah, blah. And then ESG is like more reporting. It's a very, very simplified version of the answer. But when you're looking for like, what career do I get into? They're different.
Yeah. And I would say the point you make about reporting is an interesting one, because a lot of jobs right now are focused on disclosures. That seems to be, and frankly, when I talk to a lot of the companies, they're very much focused on disclosures. How do I get the activity data that I'm generating that probably has some sort of environmental impact translated into some sort of carbon metric or whatever? Everybody's focused on that. Problem is, they're not doing anything with that information yet because they're all focused on just getting it. And I'm always trying to pull these companies along to say, well, yes, you do need to measure because you can't show impact if you're not measuring. But boy, you actually need to be ready to pivot towards sustainable business operations. You can't just be collecting this data, calculating carbon, and then saying, well, you know what? I think it's going to go down next year because driving a little bit more efficiencies, it's probably going to go down by 1,000 metric tons or something, and that'll be fine. You actually need to transform your business around this topic. And that's also where sustainability and ESG intersect as well.
That's funny. And, it's funny you mentioned that too, because I literally had a conversation about this exact thing yesterday in a company. I don't necessarily say if it's mine, but it is mine. And it was funny because we're actually starting to see that we need to have disclosures. Those are starting to come up in proposals for projects where it says, you get extra points for being more sustainable. And you put that little monetary nugget in there, suddenly everyone's like, how do we do this immediately? And, that's one of the big challenges we have. So we're seeing it more. Companies need to be disclosing. And then there's an issue with actually doing. So are we going to move towards a point where we're going to see the requirements aren't just that you disclose, but that you also are, getting better over time?
I think so, but I'm not sure how long it's going to take to get there. Because even when I talk to the financial services firms I talk to that are looking to analyze that sustainability disclosure, still haven't connected between the impact. They're still going out to market and saying, well, I'm going to look across this big, broad group of consumer product firm, like, whoever it is. Like, I might compare Xbox to M&Ms and figure out what their carbon metric is and then see if one of them's better than the other, which makes absolutely no sense. So I think right now the disclosures are kind of like, it's really hard to explain. It's not quite a carrot, but it's almost like something that financial services firms and even businesses believe are apples to apples when really it's apples to oranges. Mm-hmm. And that is getting in the way of even the impact. Where I think the pressure will come from is where you're saying, Nic, which is procurement teams are starting to ask for this in RFPs and other sort of relationships. And they're also looking across their value chain and asking their most trusted suppliers to report this information. Mm-hmm. And they've been doing this for, oh my gosh, probably the last 8 or so years, but it's really picked up since COVID.
Yeah.
Challenge is a lot of those suppliers don't necessarily have the tools to do it. And when you get into something like consulting services, it's even more difficult. Like, what would your time be worth from a carbon perspective? Because in theory, if you're consulting with somebody, you're their scope 3 supplier. Your hourly billing has a carbon number associated with it because you're traveling, because you're using technology. I have not seen anybody provide that with their invoices yet. That, I think, is coming as well, which is even scarier.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Gosh, that just blows my mind.
I know. How do we even know that we're saying, like, I could just say anything. That's my question. I could say anything. What's stopping me from saying we're doing X tons, I mean,
You could.
Well, it's like
today you totally could. Once the regulations start coming in, I think that'll shift a little bit. And because companies will start asking for attestation and auditability of that information, where I think it will end up is because it's not as hard and fast as like a financial number. So as long as companies are able to explain the calculations, I think you'll be okay. Yeah. But yeah, in the short term, you could pretty much say anything because it's completely unregulated.
Carbon neutral.
I mean, is it going to be like food labels? When I buy a plane ticket somewhere, it's going to say this is so many points. Here's your mileage, and here's how many carbon points you've lost or won.
It could very much be that.
How much you're ingesting.
There are consumer product goods companies I've talked to and retailers that want to get to that item level carbon tracking because they see that consumers are willing. Well, one, they want to save the world. Two, they see that consumers are willing to, in some cases, pay a premium. You don't always have to pay a premium for these things, but they also see that consumers are willing to pay a little bit more to cover maybe some of the transition costs. So as a result, there are some claims already being made, which I'm sure you guys have seen, like, this comes from sustainable farming or this, whatever it may be, where companies are driving. And this is I'm kind of on the fence about this one because of the Xbox M&M situation. Some companies are looking to produce item level carbon tracking. But when I'm a consumer and I'm looking at the cost of carbon from an Xbox, which has all sorts of rare earth minerals, which has energy that runs over a period of 5 to 7 years or whatever it is that the Xbox runs, versus M&Ms, which has some, there's some farming stuff there. There's some maybe dairy in there. I'm not sure. You can't compare those things. So even if I knew, to your point, Laura, like if I knew what the carbon ingredients were of that product, is it really telling me what I need to know? Or do I need to think about, like, if we're going down the ESG road, where might forced labor exist in that supply chain? Like on either side, I have no idea. How would a company even report that? And that is a whole other topic, the forced labor. I mean, carbon you can kind of get with energy, there's, the GHG protocol and other ways to calculate it, but forced labor is extremely difficult to uncover right now. And even with products, you can trace it with tools like blockchain. Like you can trace a product end to end. Maybe it gets lost if there's like a processor in the middle, but with forced labor, you can't do much.
So, okay, forced labor. Explain that one to me, layman's terms.
Well, there's some.
I'm just like, if I can understand, there's someone listening who also doesn't know what that means.
Laura just did that. I get it, but for those of us who might not understand.
Oh no, I don't. I don't, but I want to.
So forced labor is where somewhere in your supply chain there are people who are being exploited in order to provide you with the goods and services that you need.
Okay, that's what I would have assumed, but I didn't want to assume.
Yeah.
So okay.
It is a really tough challenge. And what companies need to really focus on, rather than like with carbon, what they're doing is they're going out, they're doing engagement with their suppliers and educating them on how to report carbon. And then hopefully those suppliers take that education and say, here's the number. Yeah. With forced labor, it's a little bit different because if you reach out to a supplier who's using forced labor, likely they're not going to share that with you because they're using forced labor. And so what companies need to do, especially the biggest companies in the world that support these global south regions where forced labor may be more prone, is they need to start engaging at the country level and with the biggest suppliers in there directly to form consortiums and really tackle it from the government level, which is a much heavier lift. But honestly, if you don't approach it that way, I don't see that you can fix the issue. And any company would be remiss not to be focused on those supply chain issues because, and I don't want to call out any or shame any specific companies, but there have been companies over the past year that have been leading with, very green stories and green products only to have some sort of forced labor or pollution issue pop up in their value chain, and then they're on the hook for it. Right. So it's an issue. Both issues are something that companies need to pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. I'm still picturing the food label where I have to decide between the flight that has less emissions but higher forced labor. Like it just doesn't even make sense.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a consumer, how would you even know that to Nic's point, how would you even know that what they're saying is true? Because there's no regulations around these things really.
Yeah. It's like the organic question. This is organic. Well, I mean, isn't everything?
Right.
There's still a lot of anti-ESG pushback. So even when we have path forward or a process. There seems like there's also people, companies, interests trying to get rid of it altogether. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, mostly it gets back to Laura's question of that when she's doing her career advising around, do I want to do sustainability? Do I want to do ESG? Conservatives largely are trying to protect fossil fuels because a lot of those red states have fossil fuels. They're trying to protect kind of the status quo. Mm-hmm. And they see this attempt to start using investments to really push the needle in one way. Now, the reality is most Americans believe in climate change now. They want to see things happening, and we have to transition. For me, I think energy companies, obviously, they cannot shut fossil fuels off tomorrow, even though that would be great. It's too low cost and would impact too many marginalized communities to do that. You just can't, especially for global South countries. We just can't. But those companies really need to be looking at the transition. Otherwise, it becomes an ESG risk because in 20 years' time, that's not going to be a valid model anymore. Now, right. What's interesting about the pushback is at a state-by-state level, we're starting to see their budget offices come up with these numbers that are horrific. Like if you push this anti-ESG bill through, it's going to cost you anywhere from like $4 billion to $10 billion is the number. Oh, wow. For pensioners, costing pensioners money. Like the people who are making, so now your voters effectively are going to be in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting to see a pullback, a little bit of a pullback, actually, instead of a pushback on the ESG, anti-ESG push. And they're starting to say, well, maybe we can still do business with these banks, but we just need to watch what we're doing from an investment perspective to make sure it's aligned with the state's goals, which fine. But don't lose sight also of that ESG risk that you're playing with. Don't lose sight of what your voters want, which is largely tied to let's address climate change. Globally, though, it's just noise. Nobody globally cares about these U.S. politicians. Is what I see. Like I wrote an article recently about it, and the international audience was like, "This train has left the station, and U.S. politicians who are looking to get votes are not going to stop it. There's no chance." And so, if U.S. companies want to remain competitive on a global stage, they have to focus on it, and I think they will.
Wow. That's really cool. I'm glad to hear.
It's laughable. That's just so
it is
sad. When I travel abroad, I'm just like, hey, I'm American. I recycle and promise.
Yeah. No, just I'm Canadian, eh? Yeah. Yeah.
It's tough out there.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. I know we talked about it last time. Like it's just like, sometimes you just throw your hands up in the air. Like, what are we doing? Like, come on. Like, we're going to be left in the dust by this stuff.
Right. My personal opinion is that we should really be leading.
Yeah.
We're just not. At the moment, we're just not, because coming out of COVID and even before COVID, everything's so politicized that every issue seems to be a fringe issue anymore. When it really shouldn't be.
I know. It's like, just like, well, this is the number 7. No, it's not. You're like, oh my
gosh. It's more like this color is red. No. I see orange.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
They're like, no, we can't even agree on what a color is actually a color.
I know. It's really tough.
So what things do people measure? Like, what are the most common things that people are measuring, and are they getting better at measuring it?
I'd say the most common things that people measure, that's a good question. Mostly I'd say it's the table stakes license to operate things. So today there's a big focus on carbon, almost to a fault, I'd say, because while getting to net zero is critical, the disclosures are getting in the way of progress, like I said earlier. From a diversity, equity, and inclusion or social justice perspective, companies in the US, at least, have to report to the Department of Labor something called their EEO-1 number, which measures the gender, the race, and kind of the level of people in the company. Now, that information is held confidentially unless there's something like a sexual harassment suit. Some companies publish that information. That's a little bit more table stakes. What I'd like to see companies start doing, and some do it, and Microsoft does this, is publish things like their pay equity numbers and publish that EEO-1 data really so that people can reason over it and see, are the company's employees matched to the people that they service, basically? Because that also is an ESG risk and opportunity. So I see a little bit of the diversity measurement. Governance is really tough, though. Governance is more something that's been around for a long time to measure. It's how transparent is the leadership? How qualified is the board to understand the industry that they're in? Do they have diversity on the board? Because again, most companies are serving diverse populations. Those are the types of metrics that I'm starting to see reasoned over. Now, there are all kinds of ways that companies can, and financial services firms can get that information. And those are from the big ESG data aggregators like MSCI, Refinitiv, S&P Global, Sustainalytics. They all have that data because it's usually like point in time, it's reported by the company. What's more interesting to me is keeping an eye out on active news feeds for crises, because crises are really where you uncover, from an ESG perspective, crises are really where you uncover all of these things. Like if one of those companies who's leading with green suddenly does have an issue in their value chain, well, maybe you need to think about how well do they really understand their business, for example. So the metrics gathering is one thing, but I love the crisis because it really shows a company's true colors when the crisis hits.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Nice.
Not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah. So I come from like a habitat restoration monitoring biology background. And, in that realm, when you are causing issues, let's say, you can mitigate to another area. Is there the same concept of like mitigation and adaptation going on with ESG as well?
Mitigation and adaptation with ESG. I'd say...
I would totally say asking that question wrong too, because Nic wrote it.
No, it's a really interesting question because it's something that got talked about so much at the last two COPs, but not from the perspective of ESG. Frankly, the adaptation piece is really ESG, to be honest with you. Adaptation is ESG, and mitigation is really sustainability and those other things. So when you're talking about mitigation and kind of improving your sustainability footprint, you're trying to manage your company's impact on the world. You're trying to, in effect, save the world. When you're talking about adaptation, it's very much that ESG lens, because now you're looking at the world and you're saying, oh my gosh, this world is a scary place. I need to change. And here's what I'm going to do to adapt to that scary place. And just even a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article about the World Economic Forum published their risk report, their annual risk report. And what struck me was how interconnected and complex, for the first time that I saw it, how interconnected those risks are. And what companies need to do is they need to do things like read the WEF report and say, all right, where do I intersect with these risks? And then how can I adapt to this crazy world? And granted, a crisis, to my earlier point, a crisis that is caused because you're not paying attention to your business is one thing. A crisis that is caused because we're in a crazy world of interconnected risk and war and, all these complex issues is something a little bit different. There will always be like black swan events like COVID that you're just not going to be able to prepare for. Right. But I think ESG can help you adapt.
Well, I actually have a curiosity point then. So like the train derailment in Ohio, would adaptation have been to change the brake system prior to an accident, and mitigation as well? We had an accident. Now we have to fix the issue. Or am I not seeing it that way?
Well, I think you're thinking about it right. What I'd say is, if I was them, I would be mitigating all my trains with brakes immediately. Yeah. Right? Yes. I think the adaptation piece was maybe a failure to realize how serious that issue was, because there was lobbying against the pneumatic brakes going on. Ultimately, the previous administration decided not to enforce it, which resulted in a risk for the company. I think it kind of plays both sides. It was them trying to, had they understood the issue a little bit better, maybe, I don't know that they would have fought against pneumatic brakes.
Right.
I mean, when you think about what a logistics company does, they're transporting goods across environments, and part of their unknown stakeholders are the communities by which they pass through. So if I'm at a logistics company, frankly, like anybody right now should be thinking about this. Not only how do I interact with the communities and the businesses at my endpoint and at my, from my start to finish endpoint, but everywhere in between, and based on what I'm driving or transporting via train, there are regulations for controlling hazardous materials, obviously, but I think this represents a really interesting pivot for the logistics industry, where they should be thinking, what are kind of my hidden stakeholders in the communities that I pass through that I really need to make sure I protect? And then what are the ways that I can protect them? Because otherwise I'm going to have a massive financial risk.
Right.
Financial risk for me, horrible health risk for everybody else. Right. And that's what ESG really does, is it forces companies to take what they should just be doing, which is let's not harm people. And it turns it into, maybe we should not do this because we'll be out of business if we do, out of existence.
Right.
Yeah, that's a whole responsible, ethical, moral, all of those things.
It is.
It's, when does good business just become bad business because, of these things that we thought would never happen and they did. And I think, isn't that why you write down risks and you have a risk manager? They tell you that this is going to happen or this could happen. And then you have to say, well, the risk is this, it might never happen, but it's this big. So we still should address it. Or it might not happen and it's real little. So maybe we'll ignore that one for a little while. But I think, something like a derailment is kind of a big one. Yeah.
It is
put on the consider list.
A brakes on a train seems really important. It's just good brakes, good brakes on a train.
Right.
Priorities. But I don't know if that's along these lines or advancing from these lines, but, you work at Microsoft, your technology. This is, I actually needed to change the brightness on my computer the other day, and it told me if I keep my brightness up without doing the power saver, I'm wasting energy. So thank you, iOS. I appreciate that.
That was Matt. Matt
make me feel guilty for having a bright screen. Okay. So now I'm like, all right, let's turn it down dimmer. I can kind of see what I'm looking at. But I'm saving the environment. What is, technology's role? Do these conversations happen at Microsoft, especially with chat AI becoming huge? And what kind of things are we looking for from technology on an ongoing basis with sustainability and ESG and everything?
Oh my gosh, this is such a huge question, because technology has so many intersections with our lives already that, like, from a consumer perspective or even from an enterprise perspective, there's an intersection with the manufacturing of devices through how it's used. Because remember, I work at Microsoft, we make laptops, we make Xboxes. When you use those devices, there's a carbon cost to us because you're using energy that we have to account for. And not only that, when you dispose of those items at end of life, we have to account for that carbon too. And so things like repairability, circular economy, efficiency, energy efficiency is critical for any consumer facing company. From the perspective of like a big tech company that's offering technology out to help customers, it's an entirely different thing. There are intersections with data, which we've already kind of talked about in the value chain and supply chain. So procurement teams, financial services firms very much have comparable problems where they're trying to gather as much information as they possibly can from their ecosystem in order to make some sort of informed decision, whether it's to invest, whether it's to cut a supplier, whether it's to engage a supplier maybe on some sort of transformation. That data and even artificial intelligence and machine learning in some way can help uncover, what should I do? Help me understand what I should do. Now, what I always caution companies when I talk about that particular thing, though, is don't be so myopic in your view, because if the data is telling you that, let's say, a global South supplier who can only source 30 energy is, 10% of your carbon emissions, but maybe you're the biggest customer for that entire community and you don't realize that and you pull out, it's going to cause bigger issues and you're going to harm people to do something that you think saves the planet and people, but doesn't really. So I always encourage people, don't look at any of these issues or decisions in a bubble. And technology can help you do that if you configure it right. The last thing is, technology plays a really interesting role in modern business. And that role has been, S&P Global has a report that shows how much intangible value is now S&P 500 value, meaning we've kind of gone from like physical assets to these ideas and things built on technology. That's what makes companies valuable today. The intersection with sustainability, with DE&I, with ESG, with all of these things sits largely in the technology stack. And it's data, but it's also things like business processes that exist, intellectual property. The challenge is, and this is where I started my career, was in IT. The problem is, for the past 25 years, technology has been serving really one function, which has been that core business function. But now, with a robust ecosystem of stakeholders, we have all kinds of different things they're asking for, like carbon data, like, are you managing your land right? Are you looking at your water usage? Are you hiring diversely? A lot of those IT systems, the technology stacks, can't handle those questions. And so a couple of years ago, and I don't think Satya coined digital transformation, but Satya said every company is a software company. And when I revisit that through today's lens, it really brings home for me, every company needs to transform around their existing technology stack, but these new questions that are being asked. And so there's like a real modernization that I think needs to go on, both from a technology stack and, frankly, a corporate culture kind of modernization as well. So those are, I think I got 3 different technology intersections there, Laura, but I could literally talk about that all day.
Well, I don't know, it's kind of fascinating. And yeah, shout out to Satya. Did you get to meet, I think the last time we talked, you hadn't met him.
I have still not met Satya.
All right, we need to make this happen for both of us.
Let's make this happen.
Yeah. And I still think about stuff he wrote in the Hit Refresh book that he wrote. There was things that he was talking about that Microsoft was doing, and technology things and little hints about the future that were fascinating to me. And he was, casual. It was not what the book is about, but it was casually written about. And it was like, oh, this is really interesting.
One of the things that I think is a great ESG example that we don't really talk about in that way is the work that we've done on accessibility, which was born out of Satya's passion on the topic. When I remember watching that Super Bowl commercial for the Xbox Adaptive Controller and just being like, oh my gosh, this is going to open up so many opportunities for gamers who can't interact with these games in the way that they could. And since then, we've done work to integrate accessibility into our Office products with like real-time translation, so that, and I used this earlier in Edge, somebody in Norway wrote an article about ESG that I wanted to read, and I used the real-time translation so I could read it.
Yeah.
That makes the article accessible to a diverse group of audiences. So that focus on accessibility, which would, to me, hit the S, has opened up a world of opportunities, not only for Microsoft, but for that population to engage with technology in new ways, which I think is just incredible.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And then, so last technology question, maybe. Is Microsoft feeling some of the same layoffs that other tech companies? And I have some PTSD from this, from when I used to code and stuff. That was the end of my career in 2001 when there was big tech layoffs. Is it similar to that, or is this a different thing?
Well, I think Microsoft has not been immune to the big tech layoffs. I think it's publicly been available that we're still under there. My team's been shifted around a little bit, but we're still alive and kicking and focused on sustainability. I tend to get myself in trouble because customers want to talk about ESG and everybody says, go talk to Matt. And then I end up on too many calls. But, we're still very committed. Our commitments to sustainability have not changed. We just hired a new chief sustainability officer, and those conversations still happen. What's interesting broadly is, the tech layoffs are kind of a result of quick growth followed by overhiring a little bit.
Right.
And broadly in the market, we're seeing layoffs, right? Like there's lots of companies laying people off. There's been some rumors that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are being shut down. I've not seen that here, but I've heard rumors about it at other places. I haven't seen sustainability get pulled back yet, and I haven't seen the companies who I consider to be leaders in DE&I have not shut those programs down yet. And I still can't get off the phone with people to talk. People want to talk about this topic nonstop, despite all the economic conditions. And so I suspect it's still an important priority for a lot of boards, and therefore is still getting funded.
That's promising.
And now that you said you can't stop talking about it, let's stop talking about it. Let's see. We usually have a segment we call Field Notes, where we try to get people's notes about their jobs and memorable moments in the field. But we know that's maybe not the right avenue to take with you. So I thought about maybe we can do nerd notes instead. And we talked Legos last time, but And I'm right here with you. There's nothing you can say that I won't be excited to talk about. What else do you nerd out on?
Oh my gosh. It's mostly Lego. But I do very much enjoy reading, and I also enjoy watching like movies and even like TV shows with my kids. So right now I'm reading A House Between the Earth and the Moon. I just wrapped up Chuck Wendig's sequel to Wanderers called Wayward, which he somehow predicted the 2020 pandemic almost to a fault.
Oh, wow.
But then it goes into a post-apocalyptic hellscape, and then from there, it's crazy. But that book came out like 2019, and then the pandemic hit. So books like that, I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once. I've seen it 3 times with my oldest. Oh my gosh, I love that movie. I really hope it wins the Oscar, and by the time it gets published, I imagine we'll know.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. You talk about futurism. We talk sci-fi books. A lot of that, it comes from there. And I think one of my favorite examples of it is, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe is like one of the snarkiest books ever written. But in there is a book that has everything in it, right? It's, what do I need to know? I need to look up something. I type it in and it tells me what it is. And then we got Wikipedia right after it. And I think I love when stuff like that happens. It's so cool.
Well, so you know what? You just reminded me. I hadn't thought about this, but Deep Thought in that book. Deep Thought is the computer that's built to figure out the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And it comes up with 42. And in some ways, ChatGPT, OpenAI is like that. Give me the answer to the biggest questions I could possibly have. But ultimately, like, it's coming from a human source anyway.
Right.
I hadn't thought about it. Oh, that's it. I
have a curious question, though. I hope all questions are curious, maybe. I don't know. Is that redundant? A personal question. Does Microsoft have its own version of a chat bot like that, or working on something top secret?
We do. So, we invested a lot of money into OpenAI, which is that model. And so now we just released ChatGPT in Bing. So you can go out to Bing. I think you have to sign up for a preview, which I did on my personal account. And then you can start, instead of just searching, you can start asking it questions. That integration is already there. I've seen rumors on the internet. And by the way, I do not cover this technology or get anywhere near it at Microsoft. So I hear the same rumors as everybody else. No, that's all right. I hear the same rumors as everybody else. And the rumor that I'm hearing now is that it's going to be integrated into Office, maybe. No idea if that's true, but I think, having a helpful support while I'm writing a document probably would be useful. So yeah, we're definitely playing in that space, but it does intersect with ESG. So a lot of ESG data, and Laura, this gets back to your earlier question about the metrics. While there's hard and fast metrics for some things, a lot of ESG information, and even sustainability, DE&I, CSR, it all comes through in the story that companies tell. And it might come across in a project that they do. Where I think OpenAI and things like ChatGPT can help procurement teams, financial services firms, board leaders, others understand what companies are saying is by analyzing that, because that's what it's really good at. It's like, I have a whole bunch of information, ChatGPT, OpenAI, you tell me what you think about it based on what's there, and find connections if you can.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it implemented that way yet, but I'm super curious about the intersection there.
That's so cool. Oh man.
That belongs in the nerd notes.
I love it.
100%. And oh man, we really are running out of time. I want to talk to you forever. I have one more question I want to sneak in before we ask
all your clients. You're just here with us now.
Yeah, just forever. This is it. This is my new job. It's actually ironically a lot like my actual job, just a lot of talking and listening. But you mentioned in your bio that you're a benevolent troublemaker, and it's just a great reason, I think, that we all get along. But what does it mean? What is a benevolent troublemaker? What is it?
You know what? So one of the things I like to do, and I actually usually do this on Fridays, and I feel like saying this out loud is going to get me quickly overwhelmed, but I usually will take calls with people who connect out with me on LinkedIn. And so I connected with this woman a couple of weeks ago, and we were just, because I find that I always learn something from people. So I love talking to people about this topic. And she called me a benevolent troublemaker. And I'm like, I am kind of a benevolent troublemaker. She's like, you are. She said, because you're you're trying to not only like push the ESG narrative to where it needs to go, but you're trying to make connect to the earlier point, Nic. You're trying to make connections between people in order to make it happen and really push them to do something more meaningful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. I'm going to add it to my LinkedIn headline. And so I did.
I thought it's great. It is brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I know, like I say, I know we're getting to the end of it here. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you'd like to bring up?
Oh my gosh. I can't wait to see the next time we talk in maybe another year. I can't wait to see where this space is going. I suspect maybe we'll start getting towards a little bit of that impact beyond some of the, like, a lot of companies focus on philanthropy efforts, which are all great, but I really want to see some significant transformation towards sustainable business operations. I think we're going to maybe in a year start seeing that transition start. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. And like I say, we, of course, love to have you back and talk through all that. So yeah, stay tuned, everyone. And then last but not least, if people do want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably LinkedIn is the best. Just Matthew Sekol, look me up. You'll see me. I'm ESG all
the way. Yeah. He's not kidding. All right, Matt, thanks so much for joining us today. We had a great time.
Thanks, Nic and Laura. I appreciate it.
That's our show. Thanks, Matt, for joining us today. Always a pleasure. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.